Every city has its quiet corners, streets where time seems to hesitate, where the air grows heavier after dusk, and where windows hold secrets that have forgotten how to close. Newcastle had one such corner, tucked between two aging lanes, hidden behind a wall of ivy and silence. Few people ever passed that way, and those who did never lingered. The flat there had once been ordinary, warm light, laughter, the smell of tea drifting through the evening. But over the years, something in its foundation had begun to shift. Neighbors whispered of odd noises, of withered plants, of shadows that clung too long to the walls. They said the place had grown hollow, as if something beneath it was waiting to be remembered. The flat in that quiet corner of Newcastle was no longer merely a residence. Over time it had transformed into something rather more sinister, an entity that appeared to drain the very life from its surroundings. After my old school friend Brody accepted a position in Toronto and relocated abroad, the place took on a peculiar, soulless quality. The air perpetually held the faint, sweetish decay of old wood left too long in the damp. It was a first-floor maisonette, but its position lent it an isolated, watchful air. The balcony was dominated by an ancient banyan tree of truly immense size. One couldn't quite call it just a tree. One had the distinct impression it hadn't sprouted from the earth, but from somewhere else altogether, some darker, more forgotten place. Its branches didn't simply rest against the wrought-iron balcony grille. They had begun to consume the bars, swallowing them whole. It was rather as if the tree were slowly, patiently pulling the flat into its grasp. On clear nights, when the moon was full, the tree's shadows would shift upon the walls in a most disconcerting manner, as if they had a life of their own. On occasion, I even fancied I could see eyes in the gnarled bark, watching my every move. Each time I popped round to check on the place, the tree seemed to have crept a little closer, as if it gained an inch or two each night. I'd been kept late at the office one evening, and as Brody's flat was just round the corner, I decided to stay over. The moment I let myself in, I could have sworn the tree let out a long, drawn-out sigh. Mere fancy, I told myself, yet there was an undeniable tremor in the air. As I settled into bed, I couldn't help but notice the tree's thickest branch, nearly a foot in diameter, was now positioned directly outside my window. It was studded with smaller twigs that looked unnervingly like skeletal fingers. In the deep dark of the night, when I awoke quite suddenly, I was utterly certain I saw those very twitches twitching. It was then the silence of the flat became profound, heavy with a presence that couldn't be heard, only felt. A faint scraping sound emanated from the kitchen, as if something were being dragged slowly across the marble countertop. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. I put it down to pests. Empty flats are so often prone to them. But then another sound cut through the quiet most decisively. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It came from the balcony. It was precisely the sound of a dry branch being dragged back and forth with some force against the metal grill. It didn't sound accidental. It felt dreadfully intentional. I assumed a strong wind must have picked up, but when I drew the curtain aside, the leaves on the neem tree across the street were perfectly still. The night was utterly silent, and yet the sound continued. Scratch, 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 with an unnervingly regular rhythm. 1, pause, 2, pause, 3, like a code being tapped out, or a summoning. The sound wasn't just in my ears, it was vibrating in my very teeth, seeping into my spine. My heart began to pound with a most peculiar dread. I got out of bed. My bare feet met the cold stone floor, but a different sort of chill was creeping into my palms and forehead. I turned towards the back room, from where the sound was emanating. The door to that room, which I had firmly closed myself that evening, was now standing half ajar. The darkness beyond was thick and cloying, rather like a curtain of black velvet. And then, the very moment I took a step towards it, the scratching ceased. The silence that followed brought no comfort whatsoever. It was the sort of silence that follows a great noise, heavy, piercing, and full of a terrible anticipation. It felt as if the entire flat, down to the very dust motes in the air, was holding its breath. Something knew I was awake, and it was waiting for my next move. Then a new sound tore through the air, a soft, hiccuping sob. It wasn't merely the sound of crying, but someone who had been at it for centuries. It was filled with a fatigue and despair quite beyond comprehension. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I felt watched, not merely looked at, but seen through. The gaze felt heavy upon my back, damp and ancient, as if it had risen from a grave. With trembling hands, I grabbed my mobile and switched on the torch. The beam of light cut into the room, and I saw. The balcony grill was a sham. It wasn't a branch of the banyan tree, but its roots that had slithered inside, tearing through stone and concrete. They were alive, breathing, and the droplets of moisture upon them shone like dark blood. Then I saw it. Dangling from one of those roots was a hand, small, a child's hand, caked in dirt, its nails long and packed with mud. The hand wasn't just shaking, it was moving in a desperate, groping motion, like a drowning person reaching for a lifeline. From its fingers dripped not water, but a thick, dark red fluid. Drip, drip, drip. I was frozen solid, my breath caught in my throat. This was no dream. I was awake, and this was real, a reality that defied all rational understanding. Then the hand's fist unclenched. On its palm was written in what looked for all the world like red paint, dissolving in the thick fluid and dripping down. "Help me. I am alive." It wasn't a word, it was a scream that gripped me. I tried to back away, but my feet were rooted to the spot. Or perhaps the floor itself was holding them fast. Then, from within the tangle of roots, a face emerged. A little girl's, eyes closed, hair matted with filth, her mouth filled with earth. It wasn't just a face. It was a soul that had been imprisoned for centuries. She opened her eyes. I shall never forget those eyes. They weren't white, but held a depth in which millions of screams were trapped. In those eyes I saw my own reflection, the reflection of a guilty man. Her lips, caked in soil, parted, but the voice didn't come from her mouth. It erupted from the walls, rose from the floor, dripped from the ceiling. The very particles of the air began to speak. "You planted a tree on my grave. It has sucked away my breath. It has grown through my bones. I cannot breathe. I cannot die." The voice didn't reach my ears. It went straight to my soul. I tried to scream, to save myself, to shield my mind from the reality standing before me, but my voice died in my throat. I spun around to run for the door, but there was no door left. Where the door had been, there were now tree roots, black, dense and breathing, which had consumed the wood and stone to form a living wall. And that branch, it wasn't merely wood, it was the girl's arm, buried in soil, crushed by time. It reached for me, slowly, purposefully, as if it knew me. Her hand, tiny, caked in dirt, moved toward my wrist. When her fingers touched my skin, I felt not heat, not cold, but a void, as if my very existence was being hollowed out. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the image was burned inside me. That face, those eyes, that hand had become a part of my soul forever. And then, quite suddenly, it all vanished. I opened my eyes. I was lying on the floor right where I'd been. The first light of dawn was filtering through the window. The door was there, wide open. The tree was outside, silent. But as I took a breath, I felt it. On my wrist, a mark, 5 tiny impressions, as if made by a small, clutching hand. After that night, I never let trees grow near my own balcony. Not me, not my daughter, not my granddaughter. But sometimes at night, when the wind blows in from the ridge, when the leaves rustle, I hear that same sound. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I know now, she is still there, that girl, inside the tree, alive yet dead, trying to breathe, trying to exist among us, near our homes, behind our lives, a shadow, a truth that we so conveniently dismissed as just a tree. And whenever I see a tree swaying in the wind, I find myself asking, is this one a grave too? Is there someone trapped inside, fighting for a breath?